My name is Adam Holt. I am the Chief Financial Officer at Blair Church and Flynn Consulting Engineers.
Can you give us kind of a kind of overview of what Blair Church and Flynn is, how they're organized, to kind of give us context when you talk about your leadership style and everything?
What is the firm? What is Blair Church and Flynn? Originally, if you go back in your Wayback Machine to 1958, pretty simple, very traditional civil engineering firm that focused on flood control. Today, it is evolved and grown and moved into a broader space of consulting. We do engineering work. That's still, I think, our core competency. But we are seeing a lot more work come through the door and new teams developing around land surveying, land services. We're seeing more opportunity around environmental. Right, we're building a team there. Landscape architecture, construction management, kind of the cradle to grave perspective on developing a project. And then there's also some probably very traditional peer consulting opportunities that are happening in our firm, where we can write reports and help people solve problems, but not necessarily execute those solutions like we have in the past. So we've moved into a different place. The way that's organizing and changing, and again, we're being adaptable with that. If you look at the firm, there is a group that really focuses the bulk of its efforts across all of those services on the regulated utilities. So the PG&Es, Southern California Edison's, the gas companies, San Diego Gas and Electric. Some of the water companies in California are privately owned and therefore regulated. There's a group here that really focuses on municipal clients, the city of Fresno, Clovis, the county of special districts, right? You could fill in all those blanks. That's where you're going to find roads, bridges, sewer, water for those type of municipal clients. There's a group here that focuses on site development. Site development work for schools, hospitals, public use, institutional type site development. There's a group that does all of just the land services, so surveying, environmental work, land agents dealing with property acquisitions, things of that nature. Historically, the groups were led by a principal, very traditional. It's shifting, and we're working towards a place where the groups are a little smaller and more manageable, can be led by people at various points in their career, depending on what's going on, to create opportunity and allow people to be successful. And with smaller groups, what we hope is that we can continue to be nimble and adaptable. It's the clients that we work at, they use or we compete with the big companies, the AECOMs of the world, which is the largest engineering company in the world, more than 100,000 employees. Jacobs, CH2M Hill, Tetra Tech, Arcadis. These are Fortune 500 publicly traded companies. They're very good at what they do, but so are we. So the value proposition that we put in front of our clients is that they're, we use the military as sort of a parallel. The big companies are the Army. They are the Marines. They are large scale, brute force, an incredible amount of resources that sets a course and goes there. Our firm at 100 people, also military, but a little bit more special forces-ish, adaptable, small, better trained, better equipment, can't do the scale, but can get in, be helpful, and get out. It's not a perfect analogy, no disrespect to the military meant by it, but it just it's the simplest way we have found to communicate. The capabilities are the same, then there are some specializations in there, and for us, the adaptability is what's really important, because we see over the next 10 years a lot continuing to change, particularly in this state. The regulatory burdens that clients have to go through now are incredible, and they change quickly every year. Environmental requirements, permitting requirements, funding and financing requirements. it's no longer a lather, rinse, repeat circumstance all the time. So I think that's kind of our firm in a nutshell. We've grown about 105, 110 people. Our work is all throughout California. We have projects in Arizona, Nevada, Washington, but really our core focus is here in California.
So can you give us a history of how you became the Chief Financial Officer?
I started with the firm in 1996. I had learned AutoCAD in high school, and I got a part-time job while I was putting myself through school. I really enjoy what we do as a company. I like engineering and surveying and landscape architecture, all the professional services we provide, because I really enjoy the built environment. I think it's super cool what our firm does and the way that we contribute to things. I did not enjoy the academic part of engineering. And my father told me early on, don't be miserable doing something. You have to enjoy what you're doing. You have to be passionate about it. College is no different. My dad always told me, think of it as a key that just starts to unlock doors. You don't have to obsess over a major. And so when I wasn't enjoying the sort of engineering curriculum, I decided to do something different, and I studied sociology and communications and people stuff. But I got to come here to work every day and engage the other part of my brain and do engineering work. So from 1996 to 2001, 2002, I did that, and I went to school at Fresno State. And I kind of moved through the ranks there too, from doing CAD work to doing design work to being an assistant engineer. I graduated and had every intention of leaving the firm because my degree wasn't in this, and it helped pay for my degree, but there were other things I thought I could go do well. Ken Church and Mike Flynn thought otherwise. And they said, you understand what we do, you're passionate about it, you have an entirely different skill set than what's here. And at the time, the firm has maybe 20 people. And so that, I kind of crossed over from doing the real technical work to assignments and responsibilities that were business oriented. It was the beginning of what is today our business affairs group. How do you create the systems and structures for, if you're going to grow as an organization, right? The systems and structures that complement human resources or IT infrastructure, a business development plan, marketing materials, and sort of the approach to the strategy. So in our industry, sometimes it gets talked about, and I'm sure others do as well, that it's a stool, a three-legged stool. Engineering is what you sit on. And then there's these things that support it, the dollars and cents, the people, and the infrastructure internally. And so I was given the task of building those things. What was being done naturally by entrepreneurial type people, George Blair and Ken Church and Mike Flynn, and they were all very effective at it, but they could see if the firm was to accomplish bigger, better, badder, greater things, some of this would have to become formalized, and we would have to be able to bring teams in that could make good decisions without it solely being the personal experiences or gut that George and Mike and Ken had about what they were doing.
So what happened in that transition period?
Part of it is, we'll get this out of the way early, part of it's luck. You can't beat good timing. I mean, taking advantage of the moment and sort of preparedness and good timing, people think is luck. Mm-hmm. I was certainly at the right place at the right time. If you took all the employees we had, all 20 or so people at that time, I was an outlier in so many ways. That helps you stand out. That helps people see things that are a little bit different. And Mike and Ken, a big part of the firm, we still believe it today, when you see talent, when you see something a little bit different and you know that it can make a difference, but you may not know exactly how, don't be afraid to hire that person. Don't be afraid to use them, because it's pretty rare that you get those opportunities. So we'll get luck out of the way. I mean, I was at the right place at the right time, and there's nothing wrong with that. Those are great when those moments happen. That happen to people. if I reflect on myself and the things that I think I do well, one is communicate. My college, what I enjoyed learning about and sort of having to apply in an academic setting was sociology and communications, people. How do they work? Whether you got 2 of them or 2,000 of them, there's really fascinating parts of people in the way that they congregate, work together, and communicate. So I think I communicate well, which helps. Again, in our industry, if you were just to go make really generalized, stereotypical statements about technical professionals, they don't communicate well. They tend to be more introverted. They struggle to express some of the softer skills. So maybe I stood out a little bit there as well. Another trait that I think has helped me along the way is that I get along with people. There's a lot more to be gained by finding out what's going on with someone, what makes them tick, how you can sort of mutually help one another get from point A to point B. Another trait that I think has helped me is that I'm competitive. I like to win. I like to set goals. I like to see the team come together and the sort of collective we push something over the finish line. So when you come into a business environment, which we are, even though it's engineering and all these other fascinating and sometimes very complex technical issues, we can't lose sight of the fact that we're a business. We're not an engineering business. We're in the business of engineering. And so the business part, you have a format that's competitive, and I like that. I do well in those environments. And then in terms of a trait of mine that fits well here, that George, Mike, and Ken believe very much in their own way, I have a good entrepreneurial spirit. Take risks and try things, and don't be afraid to build, don't be afraid to fail. It fits well with the business. It's never going to be the same. It's just change is inevitable, all the sort of cliches that go around that. And so I think they recognize that. And if you look at the other leaders around here, I think that's a common denominator, is that there is a little bit of an entrepreneurial flame in some, an absolute, forest fire in others, but there is the appreciation for business and being an entrepreneur and trying things.
What was your turning point in your career? I think everyone kind of has a moment where if I go one route, I don't end up where I'm at, and I chose this route, and that's why I'm here. Do you have like a defining moment?
In terms of my career here, that's a really good question. I would go back to, I graduated from Fresno State. My wife is accepted into a residency program in Wisconsin. I give my 2 weeks notice, and because we're packed and we're moving to Wisconsin, and I'm going to go do something in PR or marketing or my skill set, and I don't know if we're coming back. So I kind of made up my mind at that point. If there was a turning point, it was being willing to listen to Mike and Ken talk about how I could fit in here and what their vision for it was. And although it was atypical, they had a plan. And being willing to listen to that in spite of what might be obvious barriers. I'm not an engineer, right? I'm moving. I'm going to go live in Wisconsin, right? I mean, there was a lot of those things to sort of think about, but being open-minded, being adaptable to the moment and seeing the possibilities brought me back here, to have these other sorts of opportunities. And, I'm very happy. I love what I do. I love that every day is different. I think that's great. And those are thankfully sort of natural, organic pieces of the job that I have here. Had I said no and just kept going because it seemed like at the time I was around egg in a square hole, I would have missed this opportunity, and I'm awfully satisfied with where I'm at.
So that's on a personal level. What are there any things within your career that got you into that position where they would offer you that sort of job? Is there anything in your career development that kind of defined and put you in that position, I should say?
Well, you go back to communicating well, getting along with people, being competitive, having an entrepreneurial spirit. I can tell you people can say they have all those things. I had the benefit of being here for 5 or 6 years doing the technical work and having it be applied. Being someone that can be counted on, being somebody that would be willing to take the task that may have seemed impossible and figuring out a way to get it done. At the time, early on, so it's lots of little data points I have to imagine in the prior leaders of the firm. If you look at Ken and Mike, and they have to start making decisions about the next generation, taking players off the bench and putting them in the game. It's lots of little data points that add up to those decisions. Early on, when I started here, maybe it was 1997, the firm won what at the time was its largest contract to do a trunk sewer for the city of Fresno. It was about 14 miles long, 72-inch diameter pipe, big stuff. Definitely an incredible victory for the firm to have competed and won that job, and now it was time to deliver. And so I was tapped early on to just be one of the minions, running AutoCAD, developing construction documents. And a few months into that project, one of the more senior CAD design techs AEs left the firm. And I was brought into Ken's office and I was told this happened, and he was very direct. Can you do it? Or do we have to go hire somebody to replace the gentleman that left? And I said, I can do it. And at that point, it was just roll up your sleeves and get it done. Stay late, work extra hours, hustle a little bit. So I think there's lots of those little data points. And as my career progressed and went over to our business affairs team and building that, there are moments where our firm won a national engineering award. We've won it twice. ACEC, the American Council of Engineering Companies, is the sort of national body that represents engineering firms, consulting firms, legislative issues, regulatory issues, business issues. And they have an annual gala where you have to go win at the state level. So you submit your project, you win at the state level, those 50 projects, and then there's an international component to projects that are all over the world. They go to Washington, D.C., they get evaluated. The 15 best in the world are recognized for client service, creativity, sustainability, cost effectiveness, some of the core tenets that you might score an engineering project. We had worked on a bridge for Southern California Edison that was this pedestrian bridge. Really cool engineering, a big suspension bridge. A lot went into getting it built in a national forest. It was complex. So one of the other guys and I said, we should submit this. This is really cool. Mike Flynn said, there is no way you two, with that project, this is not something that's gonna catch traction. We said, no, we can. I'm certain that we can enter this in the competition. It's absolutely amazing when you get right down into it and evaluate the technical merits. And Mike said, I will personally take you two to Washington, D.C. for the awards gala if you pull this off. And so we sat down and just sheer force of will. We can do this. We've never done it before. We don't submit awards. Engineering companies and the people in it tend to avoid the limelight, and they're very humble about what they do. And so we win at the state level, and we're at the state awards dinner, and we get the phone call that we're a winner. We're not just a contestant in Washington, D.C. We're a winner. It's another little data point about, along the way, when somebody looks back and has to make a decision, we got to take players from the bench and we have to start building a B generation of people. I think there are moments like that where you didn't back down. I'll try it. I'm okay to fail. We'll fail forward. That's something that was told early on in my life, that it's, if you're going to fail, you will fail. It'll happen. Fail forward. So it's maybe at times made me more open to taking risks when I feel like even if I fail, there's something good on the other side of that.
Okay. Well, that brings us right into our next question. Is there something like you wish you could have back? Something big in your mind where you could change it? You do something differently?
I can't think of anything huge, that's a significant pivot point where I really want to take that back. I really like where I am. I like where I've grown to at this point in my career. I feel comfortable with that. I know what I want. I know what I expect from people. So I like that. But there's lots of little moments that I learned from that I'm not proud of, that under duress, in a stressful situation, trying to ultimately get the right thing done, but engaging a peer or a coworker poorly, not communicating well, not keeping an even keel. There are plenty of those, like poor leadership moments or poor communication moments where I didn't do well. The ones that I think the most about when I make future decisions are the really where it wasn't just communication, but I think there was really close alignment with poor leadership, at least poor in my spectrum of poor. My leadership style is not to assert my position on an organizational chart on others and force them to do things because I am of a title or I am of a certain stature. That's not my style. But there are moments over the 20 years I've been here, and particularly the last 12 years in a leadership role, where I have failed in that I've given up on conversation. I'm stressed out. This just must get done. And I kind of went there and played that card. And in the cases that I think of it most clearly, where it involved coworkers or it involved sub-consultants, the reason I hold on to them or think about them is because they forever affected my relationship with that person. When you do that, you run the risk. If that's your leadership style, great. You're probably okay with sort of those outcomes. But I'm not. I like people, and I like to work as a team and collaborate. And at those moments, I assert myself in ways that were not productive. They were productive in the short term for the task. They were very ineffective long term in some of those relationships.
And so, in what ways do you believe motivation affects employees?
If an employee is not motivated, then they're not really being effective in what they're doing. If they're not being effective in what they're doing, they're probably not happy. So I would kind of create the linkage that way, and then I tend to think more about how then do you motivate people, every day, because it's clearly important. If people aren't motivated, then your job as a leader can become being a glorified babysitter, wandering around forcing people to do things. It can set a trap for, in my opinion, micromanagement, where you're constantly having to stick your hands into everything because the people tasked with it are not motivated. So if I think about what my job is here and how to motivate people, kind of summed it up in sort of three things, or the effect good leadership can have on motivation. You have to find a group of people that believe in what they're doing, believe in an organization. Absent that, you're already at a disadvantage. Here, from a corporate culture standpoint, you've heard it. We talk about higher attitude, train skill. That we can help people understand the formulas for things. We can show them computer programs. We can teach them how to use AutoCAD. We can teach them how to use land surveying instruments. They can learn plant materials. They can learn construction management techniques. But you have a very difficult road ahead of you as a leader if what you are constantly having to deal with is attitude. So we hire attitude, train skill. If they have a good attitude and they want to be here, that's a big part of the effort. Here, culturally, I think what we learned from Ken Church in particular, sort of the four dimensions of motivating people. Ken always talked about recognition. You have to recognize people's efforts. You have to respect people. People are recognized, and if they feel respected, that's important. Third dimension, is security. That running a business is complicated. There's a lot that goes on every day. There's a fine line between the transparency so that they understand what the needs are and can support you, and then remembering that what people value a lot, what keeps them motivated, is a sense of security. So, not as a generalization. And then probably the fourth dimension is the obvious one, compensation. So not everybody is the same. So for, here in terms of when we talk about motivating staff, rewarding them, encouraging them, dealing with those things, I tend to work, because that's what I was taught here, on those sort of four dimensions. I think the third thing that I do, that we do here, certainly, is that you have to set goals. If you want to motivate people, set goals, and then hustle. Everybody likes to win. And so there's a psychology in ringing the bell when something great happens, when there's an announcement that's, something has gone our way. And when it's tied to goal setting, it kind of keeps people going. It keeps them motivated and encouraged. They're not just feeling like they're rowing without an understanding of which way is the boat going. Where's the horizon line? So I think about motivation and its linkage to leadership. I think about it with those sort of three pieces.
Okay. And how do you measure motivation on an organizational level? And obviously, you're talking, have a conversation with people. How do you measure on an individual level as well?
Right. So on the spectrum, you've got everything there, sort of the corporate goals, the business planning goals, and did we get there? And then what are all the pieces that have to fall into place to do that? We whether it's at an organizational level or at an individual level, where we use KRAs, key responsibility areas, where we create some very simple metrics for people to understand their roles and responsibilities. This is the sort of traditional SMART goals, right? Singular or simple, measurable, actionable, responsible, timely. I think is sort of the way that acronym works. Are people investing their time the way that they need to be? And we track that. We have the benefit of being an organization that offers really smart people to its clients by the hour. And so through that tracking, we get to see how people are applying their hours. So part of it is really quantifiable, analytic. Where do you fit, with your time? Some of it is obviously more aspirational. And I think those things are more one-on-one. How are people doing? Is it a work-life balance issue? Maybe there's a quantifiable piece to that. Do they want to be trying new things for the firm to grow themselves? So for me, it's across a broad spectrum, and it's always a little bit of the aspirational in people, and there's certainly an element where you have to be quantifiable and benchmark it. When people meet those goals, you go back to recognize them for it, offer them respect for that, compensate them when it's appropriate for meeting those goals, tie those things together. Don't let a good deed go unrecognized.
All right, how much effective on employees do you think leadership roles have?
Here, if we're hiring attitude and training skill, we're obviously either deliberately at times or very unconsciously at other times drawn to people who have similar behaviors or sort of styles that we do. Yes, attitude reflects leadership kind of thought processes. The way you behave starts to really influence what happens around you. As a leader, trying to keep people motivated, leadership has a huge effect on motivation. So the kind of 4 or 5 things that I try to think about, that I keep in a little notepad, and I try to reference at least once a week. I think about framing it on a wall in my office much larger so that it's a constant reminder. What I wrote down here was leaders have to set the pace of play. You have to make it clear that we are going to work at 8 out of 10. That is where we're going. Most of the time, if you in here, the higher attitude. If you have people with a good attitude, they see that. And most people don't want to fall behind. They don't want to be lapped. They want to stay competitive. They know where the line is. So I think what I observed in people around me growing up, my father owned a business. What I learned from Mike and Ken, you have to set the pace. The illusion that leaders or owners of businesses can just not be there, be absent, that it's easy because everyone else is doing the work, don't think that's really accurate. Or maybe it is accurate at times, but I certainly would argue it's not sustainable. So you have to set the pace of play. Ken did a wonderful job, early on in my career. He set very clear expectations. And he gave the best possible information he could at the time. And from those two things, you had to go get stuff done. So we set the pace of play, right? Mm-hmm. Leaders have to do that. Provide clear expectations, the best information, and trust the people around you. That goes to sort of my third perspective, is give people room to succeed big and fail a little bit. And then celebrate both. I find satisfaction in watching the people here be successful. And successful is, a big term, or it can mean lots of different things. For me, it can be that they did a wonderful job. We got a call from a client, and someone was recognized as doing something. They may have won a job, a project or an award. In some cases, there's a certain excitement when I pull into the parking lot and I see a new car with paper plates, that people have had the opportunity to succeed. I say fail a little because there are components of what our firm does where if the possibility for failure was so open-ended and unchecked, it could result in people being hurt or killed. If somebody designs a road poorly, right? So you can extrapolate the built environment there or around with bridges and all kinds of stuff like that. We can fail a little. But it is important to learn from that stuff, right? We can't all get participation trophies and that kind of stuff. So I like to encourage learning, honesty, and accountability. Learning it's great to have people around you that like to learn, that want to improve. Our industry is not static. What we were 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago is certainly not where we are today. The nature of the work changes, the technology around us changes, what clients' preferences are changes. The cycle of infrastructure, recycled water is newer in this area, it's 10 years. It's something that we were early adopters in understanding and being about, and we're the firm that's been competitive and sought after for our expertise, and we've designed probably 100% of the recycled water infrastructure in the Fresno Clovis area. How do we get there? People learned. They were interested in it. They were watching the horizon line. They were engaged. So I think that's important. It's good to be honest. Whether I learned that from my parents or little bits and pieces from being here, whether that's there's a part of that I've adopted as a parent. Being honest to your kids generally produces better results. All of that is also in play at work. I haven't seen anyone have anything positive come out of being deceitful or dishonest with a coworker or a client. So be honest and deal with what those realities are. And then hold people accountable. And the last thing, we're joking around about the camera, maybe it didn't work, what was going on, you got to be adaptable. At least in the means and methods and perspective. You're not going to be adaptable in the core pieces of who you are, whatever your ethos is, the stuff you believe deep down. But every day is different, and you encounter different people and different circumstances and different challenges. So when I think about myself across those 4 or 5, how do you keep people motivated? How do you be a good leader and keep people motivated? I process my behaviors or the way that I want our team to win in that fashion, thinking about the pace, clear expectations, giving people room, just nobody wants to be micromanaged. Give people room. Let them show you what they can do. That's what they hope for, right? When they come here every day, encourage learning and honesty, and then be adaptable. I think that has allowed me to build a pretty incredible team here. What they're able to do is phenomenal, and what it allows me to then go do with my time to the benefit of the business is huge. And it's, in an engineering firm, when you're responsible for the business affairs component, it's not easy, and there's a lot going on, and they just do a wonderful job knowing their roles, knowing their responsibilities, taking risks, making good decisions, and it allows, in some ways, I would say that my first answers about how I got here, right? They were me answers. Really, the other half of that, or 60 or 70% of that, is the team that's around me, and by the balance of my style and those things has allowed them to take off and help our business grow. In 20 years that I've been doing this, we go from 20 people to 105, 110 people, which is a pretty steady, comfortable, secure growth rate, but a lot of it is the people around me.
Fantastic. All right, so we're going to transition into kind of some more specific scenarios and how, if you have a specific situation where you've encountered it, if you want to share, that would be awesome, or just in general, if this came into your office one day, how you would handle it. So first question is, when the group of individuals under your authority are having certain troubles, but do not typically come to you for help, how do you solve this? What's your approach?
If they're having troubles and they don't come to me, how do I solve their troubles?
Because exactly, because no one wants to come to their boss and say, "Hey, I'm struggling."
So if it's something that's affecting either their work and directly, where they're not maybe doing as much as they're supposed to, or something, it's like if it's something that's completely unwork related, it might not need to be solved by you. But if it's something that's affecting their work significantly, but they're not going to come and talk to you. So how would you solve that problem, because it is affecting their work life?
You have to be approachable. The open door, it sounds so cliche, right? It almost sounds disingenuous. Oh, I have an open door policy. Come by anytime. But if you're around the work environment, that's not as. It sounds better than it really is, right? At times, I'm not going to my boss's office. I'm not going to that guy's office right now. But you have to try to create that sort of work environment. You go back to my answer about being open, being honest, creating accountability, encouraging learning. You have to find ways to take the pulse of your team. Sometimes that's directly because you have different relationships across the team. And sometimes it's indirectly, where you need proxies to go and kind of take the temperature for you in ways that, that gives you a good, dependable feedback loop without it looking like I'm going to go get in your business, when it could be on the personal dimension. And so sometimes you have to make judgment calls. I'm not going to compound that person's suffering or problem right now. They may be dealing with something that's real outside of work. And you just sometimes have to let that ride and know that other people in the team will fill in behind them and try to help. And you have to give them a little bit of breathing room. Other times you have to take that stuff head on. If the work is not getting done, and you can clearly see what's going on, you have to have that moment of honesty. What are we doing here? I think our firm does a relatively good job on that spectrum. I think I do a pretty good job on that spectrum as well. That when we talk about reviews here or letting people know how they're performing, if you're not performing well, that is not a surprise that gets saved to be put on a form 90 days from now and somehow twisted around compensation or bonuses or year-end anything. If you're not cutting it, you're going to know. So people, I think, are generally more open to that kind of stuff. But when folks aren't performing, for me, for my style, the rest of the answers that are in here, I'm gonna try to work through multiple channels to understand that. Sometimes it's not as simple as a scorecard, right? We should be doing X, we're doing Y. Y is not acceptable. There are moments that's appropriate, but generally, if you've built a good team, you go back to the other dimensions of how I work, how our other leaders work, what our firm's about, how we build teams, higher attitude, train skill. You have people that want to be here. They like winning. They enjoy the responsibility of upholding a firm's traditions, like ours. Firm's almost 60 years old. There's a lot in there. You gotta resonate. That's gotta be cool to you. When you have a team that's already functioning on that level, if they're not performing, it's probably not because they don't care. It's probably not because they don't have the resources. It really gets down to, most of the time, something's going on in their personal life. And that's a difficult space for leaders to occupy today. Whether it's sort of the legal system, the employment law part of California, and what that feels like and how scary the interpersonal interactions can be made out to be, or whether it's sort of the spanning of multiple generations in offices where you can have, you have 70-year-old, baby boomers, the first of the baby boomer generation, Generation X, Generation Y, millennials. You have all these very different ways that people engage and check in with one another. It can be complicated as a leader to go and try to assess that kind of stuff. So in our case, most of the time it's personal. Something's going on, and we have to. You gotta understand who you're dealing with and how to ask those sorts of questions.
Now, do you tailor your leadership style to the individual, or are you more or less, do you have the same approach?
I think, right, to the best degree you could be aware of that, mm-hmm. I think my approach is fairly consistent. The words I choose, how I communicate is tailored to the person. Some people like it short and sweet, mm-hmm. And they can appreciate that. Other people, there's got to be more context. There's got to be more warm-up. There's got to be more reference points that help them start to link together the patterning that others might be seeing. It's not often that we knowingly are underperforming or missing the mark. Generally, people believe they are doing better than they really are, right? Everybody's watching their own highlight reel, and sometimes missing out on the realities of it.
So if you have workers who are uncertain of their competencies or unsure of how to do a particular job or feel invaluable to the company, how can you possibly help that? That's probably more talking about like an entry level when you're trying to gear people up to how everyone else is functioning. How do you kind of motivate, if they're at the point where they're
my approach to how confident is somebody in what they're doing, right? I think that's kind of where you're going.
Yeah.
Do they understand their competencies? Do they know where they fit in? Two different things. Mm-hmm. We talk about competencies. My leadership style or approach to getting there is to, when you give someone a task, when you're starting something off with them, I like to ask them, how are you going to do this? Tell me your approach. How are you going to get from point A to point B? What resources will you need? So that I can see their thought processes and get them to a point where it's clear through dialogue, I need to do this a little differently.
In what ways would you put together an effective group if there have been troubles in the past with teams in the organization and how they interact with each other?
It depends so much on what the troubles were.
I know.
It's such a spectrum of things that create friction between teams or individuals. like a lot of things with leaders, in my case anyway, you got to learn to figure out the personalities and the people. People are genuinely, while I think they're all motivated, again, recognition, respect, security, and compensation or money, figuring out how those, I don't know anybody that's the perfect 25, 25, 25, 25 split on that. So when you're talking about a team that's not functioning well and you've got to motivate them, to me it's to sort of make sure you understand the people, or at least you understand who's going to be most influential early on. Maybe those will evolve and you've got to figure out how that sort of power vacuum is going to happen. What's the history of the two things? What's the history of the friction between people? There's a lot that goes into that. I don't think I can give you a good one-size-fits-all answer, because now you're really into the behavior of somebody. What's the task at hand? Can you make them very small, measurable, divide and conquer? Short duration, let's just skip fixing your relationship issues? Or are we bolted in for a while, and is this one of those where, again, on the spectrum of problem solving with people, where you need to be removed from the environment that has created the issue? Let's go get a beer after work. Let's go get coffee in the morning. Let's go play golf. Let's get away from the environment where people can let their guard down and maybe communicate outside of the pressures of work.
So along with that, are there any specific practices you would use when exploring if employees would do well in a group? Not necessarily. So if they've never been in a group together, how do you decide who to put in a group with who?
I don't know that I've ever worried about that here. Okay. I mean, I go back to hire attitude, train skill. When people are not a good fit, I think that's one of those weird business cliches, but there's a truthiness to it that sometimes folks just don't fit with the larger collection of personalities in an organization.
So would you have people who you think would be, okay, so we have multiple groups within the company, so would you, when you're looking to hire somebody, would you think that, okay, this person would be a really good fit for this specific group, but maybe not for another group? Or are you usually just looking at a company as a whole?
No, it's a great question. And so there's actually sort of we don't ask canned questions, right? So it's not that kind of interview script, but when we go through the process of meeting people, evaluating them, interviewing them, getting to know them, and we go back to hire attitude and train skill, the playbook and the perspective is as global as we can make it, because the teams change, people move, projects require certain expertise at times, and so it's our belief that to have a high performing organization, you've got to have that adaptability. You got to be able to move people around. What you're able to do with H&H type work, if you didn't get along with somebody else in the team, it doesn't make sense that we have to go hire somebody else to do that same body of work, because we've hired this mix of people that can't get along. So we just haven't, I can't think of a time where we've had to be that deliberate. Our attitude, train, skill, I think we tend to attract a workforce, a group of professionals that know our firm. We've been around since 1958. There's a certain reputation, there's a certain sort of cachet and mystique about, ooh, that's a great firm to work for, right? And so people who get here like that, respect that, are tapped into our culture, want to make sure, again, generally, want to make sure the firm continues to succeed. Doesn't want to have the I'm disappointed in you moment. So I think for the most part, our groups do a good job coming together to accomplish something that's in the greater good of the firm, because I think, I mean, you tell me if you've had different experiences, I think generally we celebrate here as a firm. people are singled out and given recognition for what they've done well or that a client's grateful for. But when we talk about wins and losses, we talk about it as as one big company. It doesn't. I don't understand. At least at the scale we're at and in the industry we're at, we're of the mindset having one really high-performing group engineering team and having 3 or 4 that are failing doesn't make any sense. It's bad business. So it's a great question that somebody that maybe has very siloed pockets would have a very thoughtful answer. But for us, it's either you can find the moments where people have friction over an item, over something not going well. We don't have to do a whole lot to get them aligned. Probably the one thing we have to do the most in terms of groups is, I just sort of free think this out, is get them away from email. If there's a friction point between 2 people here or between 2 groups, I think it's often it's often a result of overdependence on email and sort of the ambiguities of that back and forth, and my answer leads to 2 more questions, or my answer demonstrates I didn't understand your question, or your question wasn't very well posed, and it kind of escalates, right? The sort of keyboard warrior moment. So getting 2 people together in those moments to talk it out over a whiteboard, that's kind of the fastest way that I've found to build a bridge between people that aren't getting along. But it's pretty rare here. We're fortunate, really fortunate, or we're very successful because we've deliberately gone and done what we wanted to do in our hiring practices and seeking people with really good attitudes.
So there are a handful of employees that do not seem happy when coming to work. You've noticed a steady decline in their work. How would you handle this, or how have you handled this?
So you gotta ask the questions, right? You gotta get there.
Is it like a closed door moment where you call them in and sit them down?
So let's have this be, most of the time here, our experience has been it's usually something outside of work that's affecting motivation or morale. But for the few moments where it's not, right, my approach tends to be the same. I tailor communication. If you go back to the space of recognition and respect by bringing it to someone's attention, saying, is there something going on? How can I help? What's bothering you? Sometimes it's, we've had it with employees that are traveling a lot, and that takes a toll on them. We all travel a lot for what we have to do. But again, what tends to be the tipping point in too much travel? Usually something in their personal life. Our spouses generally get the industry we're in and the jobs we have and the responsibilities to clients, particularly as you evolve or progress your career through the organizational chart. But the tipping points tend to be that, well, I miss my kid's soccer game, or I can't go on a family vacation, those sorts of things. So it's good to ask that. It's good to ask those kind of questions and be open. I think you don't always. It's okay to not have the answer, which it's another one of those perspectives I'm comfortable with. I've grown comfortable with. I didn't like not knowing early on in my career. I wanted to know. I wanted to have the answer. I wanted to move the needle on whatever the issue was. As my career's progressed and I've gotten a little older, I'm comfortable not knowing. I've become more comfortable at just listening and acknowledging. I get how you feel. I can understand why you're frustrated. Here's what is going on in the business that has created these demands, or what the end game is, and you need to stay the course and soldier through, or let me think about how we can improve that. But most of the time, once people can just let it out, say it, look you in the eye, put it on the table, it tends to take care of itself. Either there is a simple solution, or now that they've said it and it's out there and it's being interpreted by others, they realize that's not really how I feel. I was frustrated. That was petty of me. It's sort of off topic. My problems aren't your problems. I'm gonna go now. Have a nice weekend sort of moment. So.
Okay. See any other ones? I think I mean, there are others, but I think they've been touched on that. I'll ask you the same questions.
So, if some of these don't apply, just kind of being explained maybe why it doesn't apply. But so a certain group of employees that work close to each other have seemed to be socializing more than working. Is there a way that you could change the situation without having to separate anyone? Okay.
There's lots of ways. I mean, again, so what do you know about the people on your team? There's always a center of attention. So maybe dealing with that person. And again, it's one-on-one. Hey, you're charismatic. People look to you. You set the tone. Do you understand when you do these things and the trust and respect that we've given you, you're making this sort of behavior allowable? Do you want to make that allowable? No. Then think about what's going on. Sometimes it's just having a greater presence in the moment. That's one of the fun parts about technology today, is that when something like that breaks out, you know, and it's not a constant thing, but it's clearly something's a distraction. You know, the record lottery. Everybody was wandering around here the day of talking about, you know, if they won the lottery, what they would do. Those sorts of things. Sporting events. The day after the Super Bowl. What I love about technology, although it sounds a little passive aggressive, is my laptop, Wi-Fi through the whole thing. I can just go sit out in the design area, set my laptop down, or sit in the huddle room with the door open, and you just change the visibility, sort of the profile of, wait a minute, somebody from the leadership team is now in a place where they can very clearly see what we're doing. We're going to stop doing that. And it doesn't have to be direct. It may not rise to the level of needing a conversation. It's just adding something into the environment that makes people reflect on what they're doing. So, one of the questions that we talked about earlier, Tanya, was from a leadership and motivational standpoint, what was a success story? I told you some of the things I've done that weren't good, but I think had a positive effect long term, even though it affected interpersonal relationships. One of the things very recently that I think we did as an organization that we did really well on the motivational front was when 2 years ago we rolled out a different expectation for our project managers. What we wanted them to be doing when we redrafted their sort of roles and responsibilities was we wanted our PMs to consciously have greater percentage of their time engaged with the clients, engaged in the QA/QC process, prospecting for new work and thinking about the pipeline of projects coming in, mentoring and training. And the immediate response from the PMs, because we told them you need to have less of a doer role and more of a mentor-manager role. But a lot of them were doers. They enjoy the technical part of the work. So the first response to this was negative, and very what we thought was going to be transformational in showing them, hey, the next chapter of your career and the chapter after that is starting to be better defined as we grow as a company. Became very demotivational. I got to do twice the work. You know, how can I be a manager when I have all of these technical responsibilities? And so that feedback was almost instantaneous from people. I mean, in while we were developing that, it's like, okay, this is not exactly as expected. So we listened, and the central theme was one of resources. And so we made a very calculated risk, but a risk nonetheless. We went out and we hired our own dedicated recruiter, because if resources were going to be the thing that took a positive and made it a negative, then we're going to bring resources in the door. And so we embarked on a very aggressive hiring campaign without the work in hand necessarily. Find good people, get them in the door. We built a dedicated training facility downstairs. We built a curriculum that would help people understand everything from our culture as an organization for 58 years to how to do very specific technical things so that we could get their skill sets bolted together and on plane as fast as possible without it being the sole responsibility of the PM that they worked for. So we had a leadership moment. We took a little bit of a risk in hiring without the work, but it paid off. That immediately, within weeks, the PMs that had to start to see the world a different way quickly appreciated what was going on. The effort, the cost, the commitment, and it got it back to what we thought would be a win, this sort of very motivational, positive thing about the next steps in your career and building a team and having something you can be accountable for and help you move through the org chart. So it was sort of recognizing an unintended consequence, or that you had to walk a mile in their shoes, so to speak. What was obvious to us, well, of course we'll hire more people, wasn't obvious to them. And rather than say it, we just made the decision, we will. And most of them have been wildly successful as PMs and helped bring in work sooner than we would have expected, because they understand that's connected to the team that I want to keep here, that I feel responsible for, that I'm enjoying mentoring and developing. So, a moment in recent BCNF history where we had to take something and that we thought would be motivational, we underestimated how the firm would react, and we quickly addressed that and created some security for them, right? Respected their input, recognized that they were valuable, took a risk, and it paid off.